I don't know because I obviously just hear things.
Hmm. But what
I
this
thought China had a bigger problem that they didn't respond aggressively to Pelosi. They have like a civil uprising in the country right now because people are saying, "Wait, hold on, all this posturing that we did, where's the delivery? You know, can't just be all
I have
talk and
not
no
heard
walk."
that one.
so
Civil uprising in China? I don't think that's possible. Is it?
Oh yeah, that's another point though.
but
Won't happen.
this article in itself is kind of interesting in that Bloomberg's just is we already knew this was happening months ago. I mean, there was even details about how poor the living conditions were for the workers in the Indian factory. And I believe, does anyone remember the source who revealed that? But anyway, but that's how detailed it's been. So for Bloomberg to say, "Oh, we got sources," that I guess the revelation here is that it's specifically the iPhone 14 that's being built there. I guess that's what's unique, apart from the fact that Apple's obviously going big, like huge, into India and Vietnam simultaneously, which is the far bigger story. But just knowing which particular device is being made in which country, frankly, I don't give a shit if the iPhone 14 is being made
I
in
think
Vietnam or the
it could be
laptop.
Is it
because
Apple or
India,
Foxconn?
maybe India used to have like only 5% of iPhone share, but now maybe they are getting richer and more people wants to buy iPhone.
I think the smart move is that India is going to ban Chinese made phones, and this is part of some deal that Apple made with India, something like
They are
that.
banning the
Suddenly,
cheap ones, less than
Yes,
$150.
yeah, because they do sell a lot of those cheap copies by Chinese, and the huge number of population buys those kind of copy phone instead of Apple products.
no, but India wants to buy Indian made phones, whether that's Apple phones, the iPhone, or even a Huawei phone in theory could be made in India, which they are. In fact, they are doing that. And then
Yeah.
there's what it will do is it will encourage all the handset manufacturers to make their stuff in India, and India can now take a big bite out of China on the
Yeah.
smartphone side of things. Anyway,
Or
Tyler,
maybe they're trying to get the technology so they can improve their phones, just like China does. I'm sorry,
yeah, no,
interrupt.
no, that's a great point because what that does is it enables your own domestic market for smartphone manufacturing for sure. Robert,
I was
Tyler,
going to say spot on, Aram, spot on, Tyler.
yeah.
You know, often we think it's just Chinese. China's the bad guy. It's any country that's growing wants to get access for its level of independence, especially technologically. So spot on.
Yeah.
But I
Hold
think
on.
I think for iPhone 14 in India it's just assembling, so I don't think there's any much technology there. I guess to make in India is probably a prerequisite by the government because they can't run away with the taxes, right?
Yeah, but think about it. You know, often we think of just the technology. Sometimes it is learning the routine and backing into it. You may not get all the ahas, but if you can train enough people and get them exposure to the routine of production, routine of development, you may not get access to the top quality information, but you are now training a wave of people who can do it, or training a wave of people who can also reverse engineer.
Plus, there's no other better way to troubleshoot and dilating the bottlenecks when there's manufacturing um, stress over a company. So, the best way to learn is to allow them to work in front of you and how they tackle these issues. And troubleshooting is something that can only be learned in experience, I think. So, that's going to expedite pre-existing technology that they already have, but how to implement and improve their production, expediting the production.
Um,
I
so
think a
aren't
huge
we creating the same
advantage India
vulnerability with?
has over China is that
Katerina,
China had in the back was that almost all consulting companies from big tech companies are from India and with people from India, which is a huge advantage they have. I mean, all companies if it's Warner, if it's NBC, if it's Real Tech Economy, everything that has to do with tech and the infrastructure and everything, Indian consulting companies are participating in that. So it's a very different advantage than China had before.
Tom?
Okay,
But
Tom.
you know what we're missing the point on is we're creating the same problem that we currently have. It's a single point of failure where we're relying on one country to do everything. And I think that, I mean, if COVID taught us any lessons, that should have been it. You know, we've outsourced so much to China, so we're going to move it from China to India. It's the same problem, just different country, maybe cheaper labor. I don't know.
So
Definitely
what's
cheaper labor.
actually
Sorry, definitely cheaper labor and a lot more employment opportunities for India. So I only see more jobs, jobs and more jobs. So coming to India is a win-win for both sides.
Yeah, but yeah, it is a win-win on jobs and for both sides. But still, looking at it strategically, if countries are concerned with another country having so much information access, intelligence, things like that, or their means of production, as the last speaker said, it doesn't solve it by just shifting it to another country. We may salute it today, but 10 years from now, what are we going to say?
I agree. Like even um, medical health records, how it's being dealt with, to further develop, uh, abiding the rules of the US. All of this is mostly like the project managers and stuff are here in the US, but who actually does the work? It's mostly Indian consulting companies. Like in theory, they have access to everything from health records to music, to news, to video content of all kinds of news platforms, like everything.
Katrina, there is one little tidbit there. Most of the, and I know Jennifer, hey Jennifer, I know that Jennifer might chime in here for sure, but most of those consulting agencies are the big five. And yes, the outsourced labor from experience and working in those organizations and for them and managing software engineers and offshore and nearshore. And that actually includes India. The people that are running the projects and the architecture of the programs are actually coming from Accenture, Deloitte, IBM, GBS, and their center of excellences that are based in India. But the rule of thumb is that I do agree that it has to be broken up, because I have been on projects where that has been a thorn in many of the project managers and the program directors' side, because we cannot deliver against product and projects we need to deliver on time and within budget and scope if we have to constantly rely on it being heavy in one place. We have to be able to disseminate it across. And I agree with both gentlemen that were saying, look, at the end of the day, it has to be spread out. It can't just be heavy in one side, because then it impacts the deliverables of these multi-million euro and pound and dollar projects that are being done for Fortune 100 companies. So if they haven't learned anything from the pandemic, they're going to learn again, but I'm afraid they're going to end up having to learn again with the hard way. But most of the people that are running those main deliverables of the higher level of those projects are coming from the home of where those big five sit. So where does Accenture sit? Where does Deloitte sit? Where does IBM GBS sit? Where does Capgemini sit? Where does PwC sit? You have to see where those consulting agencies sit, because the projects come from those offices, and then the pieces of the project are disseminated to the regions where the work will meet the budget, the time scope for the particular piece of work that we need to deliver for C-level. So we need to really understand that that process has a lot of intricacies to it. And that's why the two gentlemen, I'm going to chime in with them and stand by them, that we have to be able to divide this work up, or we could hurt our projects wherever you are in the world, because it doesn't matter. We need to deliver and keep innovating. But if we put too much in the hands of one place, it's like with anything, it could come back and bite us in the butt. Thanks.
I'm sorry, but I know that Cognizant and all these companies,
Yeah,
they
Katerina, but they
officially
don't
are
hold the large.
cognizant,
But
but
Katerina, I
then
work
they
in
are in
consulting. I
reality.
work in
Don't
I
talk
work
consulting.
over
in
each
this.
other, please.
I have a consulting company. I
Yeah,
work
Yes,
in
but
Katerina,
is
slow
it
India,
down.
not
multi-million
just
euros?
Deloitte and so on. That's not true anymore. It's just
Okay,
not
sure.
the fact anymore. Like all the health records, United Health, and all of these insurance companies. I'm sorry, it's not Deloitte anymore. For
But how
example, it's
could
Cognizant,
Americans'
and then
records
they
be in?
deploy it to Indian subcontract companies.
But
Nobody
then
is actually working in the US anymore.
But then that's an identity thing as well, because then my question is, why would our records of the United States be in consulting subcontracted projects when that's data from the United States? That's where I would be really curious to see how that happens.
Kel, do you want to say something, Kel?
Yeah. I added an article from the Harvard Business Review in the back channel, and it's about decoupling. So this is a term that's been talked about um, with the America-China
Get out.
relations. Exactly, right. So Tyler, you were talking about it, and it's interesting paying attention to India because they're in two agreements that seem to contradict BRICS with the military exercise and the agreement with BRICS, but then they're also involved in the Quad as well. So people who are paying close attention will be paying attention to these agreements and how comfortable they feel like basically bolstering India with some business to help with the decoupling, so to ensure that a country's economy is not just basically hinged upon another country solely. And India stands to benefit from the decoupling process
Yes.
if they play their cards right. And
Huge.
this is why they're kind of playing both sides.
Yes, more than anybody, India stands to benefit. You're exactly right, and it's worth sort of scrutinizing uh, the dance that India is doing and how sincere they are. And but the examples that you give, which are the classic examples to give, is BRICS versus um, the Quad.
Quad.
The
Right
Quad.
now, the key difference here, if looking closely, is BRICS, which is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and what are they? South Africa, right? Is the S in BRICS? So those are there's no theocratic, there's no religious, cultural. The reason that those seem so random, like those are that's very random countries. The thing they have in common, and what that anagram unites them, is that they were the fastest growing economies. I don't know,
Yeah,
10 years
that term was used as more like for investment, not for the they
precisely.
have.
Investors started shortening, come up with a shorthand for the fast developing markets, the fastest growth. Like we're talking 10 years ago when the word was more often used. And so what has it's not an actual, it wasn't an actual them getting together and forming some kind of union of any kind. It was a shorthand euphemism for these fast growing markets. That's BRICS. So there's, but however, on the Quad, that's an actual geopolitical strategic uh, union of sorts. So,
Allies, yeah, it was brought up by Abe.
oh, Abe started the Quad?
Yeah, Abe convinced Trump to start that.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's cool. Anyway, so when I think it is, you're exactly right. India is sort of being a little the belle of the ball and knows it and is going to play that situation, you know, the same way Israel kind of does, being in between the Middle East and the West, and India's between Asia and the West, and yeah, why not? Why not play that? But I think at the end of the day, they're going to they stand to gain much, much more by being the new China of the, but be part of the West and be the West's new China to a certain extent, to the degree like this Apple deal highlights. But anyway, you're right. I think India stands to benefit more than anybody. If if they do that.
But if we are thinking of what Eme was saying, and everyone else was saying, trying to solve the problem of supply, sourcing, different things from a specific country, which was based on, especially the Asian tigers were growing and coming up with competitive advantages and becoming specializations of in one zone. It's not even specifically with the electronics, where China does this, the Thailand does the chips, and someone else do the package, that type of thing. But also even in the textile, where one country was becoming specialized in the tags or the zippers or that type of efficiency that was being really, really championed, and a lot of countries benefited in growing countries, including China, and trying to, not just decouple China, but also trying to restructure that type of supply chain that was really being put together during the globalization, and that took decades now, and a lot of economies benefited and grew their economies. How is that going to be done, and are countries going to be open to that if we are thinking about not to depend on one country because of what happened with the chip, and every country suffering, even from computers to cars and other things. How is that going to be done? And how is everybody going to be open about that?
Okay. So the next big topic is that Instagram is testing something they call candid challenges, which is a clone of the hottest new app on the planet, which is called Be Real. And I'm curious, flash your mics if you know what Be Real is.
So who is copying who these
I
days?
absolutely love that Dr. Francine is the one who does. And of course she would be. You're still a kid at heart, Dr. Francine. Um,
You are not you're not fooling, Tyler. I try everything.
yeah. And we were both bit with the same bug of, that first time you get online, and it's, you're constantly chasing that, uh,
It's FOMO.
yeah,
It's
well,
FOMO.
that it's like this anyway.
Perpetual FOMO.
The newness, always wanting to know what the newness is.
Right. I don't
Yeah,
want to miss out on anything.
yeah. So Be Real is the hottest new app for sure, and it's very hot with the young kids, and it's very unique. It sends you a notification at a random time each day, and that gives you a 2-minute window to take a photo of what you're doing at that moment. So you can't really stage it, right? Unless you happen to be on a stage at the moment that you got the notification. And
Yeah,
that's
but now they're backing off from that and they're giving you an opportunity to either take it again or or it's too bad because when you had to take it, the whole reason that it started was so that people couldn't fake their photos. And now they're broadening the the restrictions, or they're lifting the restrictions so that it allows for more, Kardashian sort of activities.
mm-hmm.
So my friend shared this with me a month or two ago, and I did not do this because to me it's like just collection of your data at intermittent times or intervals, noticing where you are, your
Oh,
location,
well, of
background,
course.
all of that. So it has nothing to do with being real. It's all about real time collection of data. So I refrain from using that app.
Yeah. So the point of the headline, before we get too far off track, is that Instagram is cloning this new concept by what they call candid challenges in a in an internal prototype. And they're ripping it off, because it's the hot new thing, and it is what it is. That's Taylor Lorenz tweets out that this company will not rest until they've cloned every feature of every app. Anyway, that's that. The next is Microsoft is putting more ads into Microsoft Outlook for iOS and Android. For users of its free services, ads appear on top of inbox and look like real emails. That sucks. And then from CNBC, a former Apple employee accused of stealing Apple's car project trade secrets, named Xiaolang Zhang, pleads guilty and faces up to 10 years in prison and a $250,000 fine.
Ouch.
Xiaolang,
张小狼
Zhang Xiaolang, yes, if we read it.
Who was he working for? Who did he sell this data to?
Who are you working for?
Zhang Xiaolang, a former Apple employee, pleaded guilty. The plea agreement with the U.S. government is under seal, according to documents. He was accused of downloading internal Apple files about the company's car project, specifically a 25-page document including engineering schematics of a circuit board for an autonomous vehicle. Gee, I wonder who would be interested in that. Zhang was also accused of taking reference manuals and PDFs describing Apple's prototypes and prototype requirements. Zhang was arrested by federal agents in 2018 at the San Jose airport, where he had planned to fly to China. Oh, well, that's a strange coincidence. He had previously worked for Apple since 2015, most recently as a hardware engineer on Apple's autonomous vehicle team, according to charging documents from the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office. The charges gave a peek into a secretive side of Apple that the company, even years later, still doesn't often acknowledge. Its division developing autonomous electric vehicles, You get the idea. And, here's, by the way, the last paragraph says, another former Apple employee, Zhang Chen, is also facing charges related to allegedly stealing trade secrets from Apple's electric car division in early 2019. Gee, it's almost like they were being paid by somebody. Two different people who have absolutely nothing in common, both stealing Apple's schematics of their autonomous vehicle. This is so weird.
Well, in some instances, those people have been found to be
Wait,
former
Eric.
service members.
Hold on. Here's the punchline. In that case with Jinhong Chen, who also planned to travel to China, Chen has not pleaded guilty and is represented by the same lawyer as Zhang. A trial date has not been set. Interesting that Chen was also planning to travel to China.
Mhm.
What's going
I
on?
believe all their expenses are covered by someone.
Tyler, in Zhang Xiaolang's case, yeah, he said he's gonna work for X Motors. So actually, it's more than obvious. He confessed
Work
that
for who, BB? I really want to know who
X
are they
Motors,
working for.
now it's Xpen Motors, X Motors in
Oh,
China.
Japan?
It's a
Yeah, she confessed.
Japan?
He confessed that it's gonna work for that for Xpen. Now the name is Xpen or X Motors in China. So, wow.
and what percent of that company, or how much is the state backing that company? How close is that company to? Because, by the way, autonomous vehicles is a type of technology that the government finds very interesting and might even back and might even want to see happen, and would encourage the development of it, and would encourage the collection of the. I mean, we've if you're a regular tech newser, as nearly everyone in the room is, we've had this conversation multiple times about how I remember a week or two ago raising the issue of my favorite dinner party conversation topic of how many uh, you know, foreign agents are working inside of, the big different tech companies, and this just makes way, way, way too much sense. This is just right out of the CCP's playbook of, paying. And even more concerning, if you really dive down this rabbit hole, where you end up is you realize that Ji Chen and Mr. Zhang are hopefully not being extorted, that their grandparents aren't being threatened to, be, disappeared and shit like that. Because that's where that rabbit hole leads to, is stories like that, where these people are being coerced against their will to do these things.
Hey, Tyler and
Yeah,
group. I'm just wondering, I'm going to shift, same topic, but how do these companies now recruit and
right,
screen?
right.
And often we only think of the onboarding, but after you've boarded the people, how do you and how can you legally do this, but make sure that you continue a level of screening also?
Well, here's the interesting bit. Apple is in Cupertino. Cupertino is, you would be, and I've had many lovely weekends in Cupertino going out for dim sum, and you would be forgiven for thinking you were in some very nice climate or very clean part of China. It's a very lovely area, and boy, as a white person, you definitely wonder, where'd all the white people go when you're having a lovely, Sunday dim sum in brunch in Cupertino. It's heavily Asian, and particularly Chinese. So what is Apple supposed to do? I mean, it was harder than you might imagine, Robert, because Apple employs an incredible number of Chinese folks, of people of Chinese origin, or whatever you want to, whatever the politically correct terminology is these days. Tons, 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 tons. And I mean, even a fairly high percentage, I would say. I would estimate it's in the 20% range, maybe even 25. So that's a tricky situation.
Well, I do know that, well, I'm assuming that if 2024 comes and let's just say some shell of the last administration gets in, and I'm not trying to put fear in anybody, just realistically, expect a more thorough level of expectations and possible pressure to address the recruitment, retention, and the leaks on this particular topic from people that they're hired from abroad. America First Point 2, 2.0.
Yeah, I, I don't want to think about Trump necessarily at this moment in time, but how I'm just, with everything that's developing geopolitically. Uh, anyway, so the next big topic I think we can run into now is Sony faces a UK class action lawsuit seeking up to 5 billion British pounds over claims it breached competition laws by overcharging PlayStation customers, which is covering 8.9 million gamers, over allegations it overcharged millions of customers. Okay. Estonia-based Ready Player Me, which helps build cross-world animated avatars, raises 56 million by Andreessen Horowitz. Binance's CCO, I guess that's Chief Commerce Officer, says hackers used an AI hologram to impersonate him during video calls to scam crypto projects into believing they would be listed in Binance. Uh huh. Okay, that's a wild one. A set of hackers managed to impersonate Binance Chief Communications Officer, CCO. Okay, Patrick Hillman. Or did Patrick actually appear in those things and now is needs a convenient way to back out of those promises? I'm tempted to think it's easier to believe the latter. Or did hackers actually make an AI hologram of this guy and reach out to uh, crypto projects and convince them that they're going to be listed in Binance? That's a bit odd. I I'm tempted to think that he actually did say those things to other uh, crypto projects and now wants to come up with a convenient some kind of excuse that he didn't. And he's
Well, there are real time deepfake apps now, even on GitHub, open source. It was recently featured on Corridor Crew as well. So if they found somebody who was similar looking enough to the person, it could be as simple as that kind of scam.
hmm. Okay.
Tweet from Binance.
Next week, I'm sorry, next article. Bloomberg says they have sources that Meta learned that the FTC opposed its within acquisitions via a tweet, highlighting Lena Khan's more adversarial stance. The FTC never sought sworn testimony. Okay. Intel signs an unusual $30 billion agreement with Canadian asset manager Brookfield to help fund its factory expansion plans. The company will split future revenue. BBC reporting that an investigation uncovered a now deleted subreddit where users were sharing, trading, and selling explicit images and private details of women without consent. And Nike NFT sales have generated $185 million, followed by Dolce & Gabbana with 25 million, Tiffany with 12 million, Gucci with 11 million, and Adidas with 10 million. 185 million is kind of respectable for something that.
What was that auto company that tried to do something? Was it Chevy or Buick, and nobody bought their NFT? Says a lot.
Just do it, NFTs, just do it.
Sony says the PlayStation VR2 headset is coming early next year, but did not reveal pricing. Twitch lifts a long-standing partner exclusivity requirement, letting partners stream on YouTube and Facebook Live and other platforms under some conditions. A whole bunch of funding announcements. Um, Someone did a piece on a look at denture talk on TikTok, made up of women with dentures, as they fight the stigma and campaign for better dental care access. Hashtag dentures has more than 1 billion views. Okay. I think that's all the big articles for today before the tweets. Did anyone have a hot article or tweet they want to make sure we get into?
I shared one on by a TechCrunch that UK is proposing or accepting a bill for the autonomous driving by 2025 to implement that the car companies will be liable and responsible for any accidental damages when the cars are driving autonomously, and the drivers won't be responsible. But the bill also include R&D money to promote the widespread acceptance of autonomous cars by 2025.
Okay, so the first tweet up today is from Saudamini that a teacher was forced to resign over Instagram photos of her wearing a bikini in the photos. And this is a school in Kolkata, St. Xavier's University. Not really a tech story, more of a social tech, I guess. Telegram founder aims to add Web3 to the platform. Recently announced a paid monthly subscription. But what Web3 services will they offer? Well, they're going to try and make it possible to send payments to each other. All of the big chat apps eventually do that. They're going to try and copy WeChat in China, as WhatsApp is now very actively doing in India specifically. Um, what else here? NFT owners have zero ownership of their digital arts, according to the Economic Times in India. The NFT owners have zero intellectual property ownership of their content and only one NFT collection. Anyway, Netflix is hunting for professionals. Streaming giant Netflix has ramped up its dream to make it big in cloud gaming as the company hunts for professionals to take on cloud gaming services like Sony. Yes, indeed. So Netflix wants to compete with the Google Arcade and all the cloud gaming space, as they kind of should. They're in a good position to do that. They have a lot of eyeballs. Um, what else? Google opens a third data center, deepens commitment to Singapore. So congrats to Singapore on getting a Google data center. YouTube launches a page reserved for podcasts. So YouTube's new feature could threaten Apple and Spotify even in its basic form, and this is coming online just as Spotify is starting to enable more video in their podcasts. So my buddy Jason's podcast, for example, the All In podcast, is available in video on Spotify. And obviously that scares the shit out of YouTube, as it should, because really nobody's able to compete with YouTube. If Spotify has a chance, uh, I'm not sure. I think they will need to wait for some very unique moment when YouTube stumbles to uh, really make a full push for video on Spotify. Anyway, plus it's not really their core mission statement. Their core mission statement is to own your ear time and not necessarily your eye time. So it's not really in their mandate. But anyway, um, Andrew Tate banned from Facebook and Instagram. He went on to gain notoriety online, with Twitter banning him for saying women should bear responsibility for being sexually assaulted. Okay. Apple to make iPhone 14 in India. We covered that in the big stories. What else? Russia tech firm sells news business as censorship grows amid Ukraine war. Yeah, not a good business to be in Russia, being an independent news outlet. A U.S. bill to urge big tech to compensate news publishers for using their content is back in the news. The legislation aims to provide news publications a level playing field, letting them negotiate collectively for an annual content fee from Google and Meta, as happens in Australia, for example. UK launches Scale-Up Visa to attract talent post-Brexit. The UK has launched a Scale-Up Visa for businesses to sponsor high-skilled tech workers to encourage more talent into the country. And over 3,000 deep tech startups in India raised 2.7 billion in 2021. That's a lot of deep tech startups. Apple's new iPhone 14 is going to be in India. That's definitely the most widely reported story today. Google admits that its TV experience is slow, introduces new updates. Toyota says,
Tyler, can I just ask you something? You just
sure,
said about India,
yeah,
2,000 startup, so raising this 2 billion or so. So how do you work out how many of them actually go on to be successful companies? Is there any data that you can get?
it's geographic specific because, for example, in Sweden, has one of the best sort of ROIs for an investor. Like per dollar invested, and then how much money from the start. We track this in Stockholm, for example, where uh, how many dollars were invested into startups and by who. And there's a database of that. And so we know month by month, quarter by quarter, year by year, exactly how many dollars are being invested in startups. And then you can map out how many of those startups returned what when they had a liquidation event, either a sale, an acquisition, an IPO, a SPAC, or whatever it is. And then you can do the math, right? And so the question is, if you put $1 and you imagine the world as a massive roulette wheel, and you put $1 on London and $1 on Stockholm and $1 on Singapore or wherever, you're likely to get the best return dollar for dollar in Stockholm, just as a strange kind of one way to slice the onion. So, but no, every country has a different uh, uh, hit rate percentage wise. Stockholm's happens to be very high, which is why it has a good ROI. But that's because they're so afraid of, they're very careful not to make, they also don't make crazy moonshot startups that aim for the moon, which the Americans are fond of doing. They're interested in hitting doubles and triples and not grand slams like the Americans do. So anyway, you get a couple of Silicon Valley's based on grand slams. They want to aim for the moon and they want to be Google, Facebook, Amazon, what have you. The Swedes aren't trying to do that. In fact, hardly anybody in Europe is, for that matter, with a few exceptions. So, um,
But do you think that's the? I used about a decade ago. I was a visiting professor at Stanford, and I at that time I was a professor at Edinburgh, and I could tell when I came back to Edinburgh, I felt like I came back to the third world, uh, and it was because the mindset of the people is very different, and the Californian mindset is go get, whereas here is all risk averse.
risk
I
aversion,
don't
right?
know,
Yeah, for sure.
risk aversion.
But that risk aversion can cause less failures, which is directly related to your question of how many of them actually succeed. It's not an embarrassment to fail, in the same way in the U.S. It's one of our weird strengths. But the the rough napkin math is somewhere in the neighborhood of. I've seen this done multiple times and in multiple countries, and it's quite different outcomes in different countries because for that reason you just mentioned. Because the Swedes don't like to fail. It really stays with you for a very long time, and they don't forgive you for it like they do in Silicon Valley, where you even get patted on the back. So you have a much higher failure rate in the U.S., but you also have a much higher kind of Mars landing rate in the U.S. With the super, you know, mega success stories that you are notably missing from Europe. But generally, you're talking about like a 3, 4, 5%, depending on how you define success. Like having a positive return for the investors, of some respectable degree. It's relatively very small, and you know the good investors know that. The good startup founders know that. And if you know that you've got a small chance of success, I think the Americans do approach it that way more so than the Europeans. The Europeans go into it thinking, no, 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 we're not going to fail. Failure is not an option. The Americans don't go into it that way. They go into it being like, let's test this out. Let's test it hard, and we can adapt as we go. But it's a different mentality, like you said.
Yeah,
So
and when we were doing the vaccine, Kate Bingham, who is the head of SV Ventures, SV Health, when Boris Johnson asked her, she said, "Well, if you got one chance, 1 in 10 chance of success," and so she said, "We'll bet on 20 companies or 15 companies. I can't remember." So for the vaccine, that's part of the reasons why Britain was first, because the government backed that, was not prepared to take that risk.
okay. So the next tweet is what now?
I just wanted to add on to that last point that you can view it in terms of how many failures led to a given success, and the idea that looking at it as a process where a stream of failures is leads to learning lessons, and those lessons have to be learned in order for the success to eventually be had. So just looking at it as a process rather than the failure as the outcome.
Mhm. Okay, next up is MacBook Pro with 5 nanometer chip tipped to enter production in Q4. That's cool. India has around 115 million crypto investors. Twitter's responded to the whistleblower, who was the former head of security, who that's the top story today, who says Twitter's got serious security problems, and what the interesting thing is the timing of his announcement. And a story that's trending at the moment is from Fortune, which is that China's worst heat wave in 60 years could have dramatic repercussions worldwide. COVID-19 lockdowns threw a wrench into the global supply chains earlier this year in China, causing shipping and production delays worldwide and hindering economic growth. Now the country is facing another major threat, and this one could be even worse for the economy, is the headline for Fortune, talking about factory shutdowns due to heat waves.
Yeah, it's actually factory shutdowns due to heat waves, but because a lot of the factories use hydro power, and as the Yangtze in a number of these places dry up, it's significantly impacting hydropower. They're also, it's kind of interesting what they're doing too is they're putting pressure on some of the companies to slow down shutdowns so that they disrupt the general public a little less, also, which is fascinating.
It says from Fortune, from the article, temperatures in several provinces in China routinely reach 40 degrees Celsius, but one key province's energy supplies are running short, which is Sichuan. Sichuan relies on hydropower for roughly 80% of its energy needs, but due to the drought, water levels at hydropower reservoirs decreased by half this month, just as you were just saying there. So that's the problem. Some factories in China were able to remain open during lockdowns through closed loop systems. Anyway, uh, anyone have another one? Oh, Katerina, you have one on warming oceans. A slowing of key ocean current could release methane trapped in layers of organic seafloor sediment along some of the world's coastlines. Okay, that would be a serious problem because methane is, what is it, 20 to 50 times worse than CO2?
Yeah,
Evan,
yeah, it's really bad.
It is for a while, but it doesn't hang around anywhere near as long as CO2.
Oh, okay. Up to 90% of marine species could be at high or critical risk of greenhouse gas emissions continue. The fate of nearly all marine species could be at risk of extinction by the end of the century if greenhouse gases continue to emit at current rates. And I guess that's due to temperatures rising. Somebody just was telling me about how a lake, a massive body of water full of all the fish died because the temperature got too high. Um, and then, yeah, Swiss glaciers are melting very fast. I know that firsthand because I just had a whole bunch of Swiss guests here at my place, and we discussed that point. They raised the issue of how where I am, we're just getting insane amounts of biblical rain, which is I would consider a blessing. If you're going to have a climate change, make it be more rain. And then they were saying the thing that's really remarkable in Switzerland is the melting of the glaciers. Anywho, the Pentagon wants to develop a network of space lasers to improve secure communications. Laser communications are more secure since they use much narrower beam than radio communications and are more difficult to intercept. Japan and Singapore lead Asia's stem cell research race. In the world's fastest aging societies, regenerative therapies attract the rich and curious. Right, that relates to the article we read yesterday about the embryos, I imagine, where essentially you could start cloning yourself in an embryo form and extracting the uh, stem cells. And Twitter confirms it's testing phone number verification badges. What else? That's about it. The rest gets quite repetitive very quickly today. So we'll
Could
pause.
I ask a question, Tyler and
Yeah,
group? This is Robert.
sure.
Did you all? I don't remember if we discussed the. And it's not quite, or it's definitely not tech, but it requires tech for this to have happened. But the recent bombing assassination in out just outside of Moscow of one of
Oh, right.
the leaders of that country's good friends, and
Putin's
the
buddy's
reverberation of what
daughter.
that could
Yeah,
happen.
yeah.
Oh, you guys did? Okay.
We did on the day it happened. Was that yesterday? Yeah. I mean, we didn't really dive into it. Did you have a thought on that one?
No, no, I just wanted to absorb all of your wisdom.
I think it's too weird for even our motley crew of minds to deal with. That's well, you know what? There was one development though, which was the internal domestic Russian anti-Putin outfit claimed responsibility for it, and the Kremlin was trying to blame it on Ukraine, obviously. But then this domestic group taking responsibility kind of throws a monkey wrench in that.
I read somewhere that is U.S. Encouraging the Americans to leave Ukraine now.
Oh, interesting.
Okay, I'll look for the article and send you.
Well, Ukraine's warning of more wild type of behavior from Russia because of the Independence Day, Ukrainian Independence Day coming up, and they expect Russia to do some really crazy shit. So they're trying to mentally prepare for that.
Well, I
And
think it's game on if Russia tries to finger them for this assassination too.
there was also related headline yesterday that Russia is now kind of scraping the bottom of the barrel for recruits to join fighting in Ukraine because now that the word is getting out about what's really going on there, and your average Russian has a sense for what's happening there, and they don't really totally want to risk. They might even agree with what's happening, but they don't necessarily want to risk their own life to do it. And
Tyler, did you talk about interest rates and how that might affect investment in startups and things like that? Because you might want to keep your money in the bank. Because
right,
I'm just wondering.
well, okay, that there's something even much that is a interesting teaser for an even much more interesting topic, dinner party topic, which is obviously as interest rates go up, people do less of the speculative type of investing. The tech investing, VC investing is high speculation investing, right? They go for a high risk, high reward. That's what that asset class is about. Is these pension funds and limited partners (LPs) want some of that very high risk, high reward exposure in that asset class of venture capital, and that's how that works. That is um, part of the problem here is interest rates impact this, but even more so, the amount of money in the system that was enabled by the kind of retiring baby boomer generation is in notable contraction and will be henceforward and will likely never return to the level that it was at. So that puts a kind of permanent pressure on the ecosystem in a kind of uh, adds a sort of resistance or impedance to the eternal growth that we had become accustomed to in Silicon Valley. And it's very significant, and it's a demographic driven social change that many people need to start getting their heads around, similar to the way Japan has to get its head around, its aging population. The financial markets also need to start getting their heads around the uh, demographic related impacts, and to really understand that. And Peter Zeihan is probably the best person to describe that phenomena, and he does so very eloquently, far better than I can, in the recent interview that he did with Ian Bremmer on Sam Harris's podcast 2 weeks ago or so. So give that a listen if you're, and you should be interested in that topic. It's world changing, one of the biggest world changing things that are happening in our lifetimes, and people are just not aware of it, and they very much should be, because it takes time to play out, but it's as sure as things ever get, because that's the type of systemic changes. It's already known what the population of 70-year-olds will be in 30 years, because they're already born, they're already here. It's not, we're not guessing how many babies are going to happen. No, the humans already, we're counting humans that already exist with a very clear, uh, very steady death rate that we can calculate and know how many of these people there will be and how much incomes they have, and they're not really changing in aggregate. So that is a really interesting topic that most people just totally overlook, the power of demographics and declining demographies, or what are called terminal demographies, because if they retract too quickly, the whole system gets way too top heavy, as China's starting to going through a bit of that at the moment in their real estate market, and the rest of the world will be going through it in other forms and fashions in other markets before too long. So it's a really bumpy ride ahead, and that podcast again does a great job of painting that picture in a really tangible, digestible way.
Can you link that podcast to top of your
Sure.
room?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. But I think that does it for today. Here's the link for you, Professor Austin. Here we go. Pinning it in 3, 2, 1. There you go. It's the YouTube version of the Sam's podcast. The end of global order. Okay. So thank you, everybody. We'll see you manana.
Hasta